And hello, everyone. Welcome into another episode of the Flyers Files podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Durso. Thanks for joining me. Before we get into anything, let's just hit the reminders really quick off the top of the show. You can follow me at Kevin_Durso everywhere. That's the Twitter X platform. That is Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, everywhere you can think of to get any of the clips that I do, the reels I'm doing pre and post game during the games, articles at 973ESPN.com covering the Flyers. And don't forget to follow along with everything that BFA Sports is doing as well, home of this Flyers Files podcast. So really quick, before we get into everything going on with the Flyers, kind of an update and just a big picture look at the Flyers at a time when there's an opportunity to do so, right? There's a time to be able to reflect on everything so far. It's been a little while for me. I know that it's been a gap in between the last show and this one. Just a few different things coming up, the busy schedule of January into February leading up to the Olympic break. It just kind of caught up with me after a while. And so back here now, going to do this show. We'll let everybody know at the end of the show when the next one is going to be, but we'll say off the top here, I'm not going to do a show next week while everything is in the middle of the Olympic break. There's not going to be any new Flyers news or anything like that other than whatever's happening at the Olympics. We'll hit everything coming out of the Olympic break and do another show as we get ready for the final 26 games of the season. So with that, let's just get right into it. And, it's been a rough go for the Flyers since the last show. It's been quite a month. Their last 15 games, they are 3-8-4. When we last had one of these, and I did the last show, the last Flyers Files episode, the Flyers were in third place in the Metropolitan Division at 51 points. They were 1 point out of second. They were 4 points out of first. That was January 7th. And it felt like halfway through the season, things were looking really good. And since then, you win 3 out of the next 15 games. You end up losing 4 games in overtime during that stretch. So you get 10 points total, but it doesn't do a whole lot. They're now 6th in the Metro, 7th in the wild card at 61 points, 8 points out of a playoff spot both ways. And that was literally within a month. So what happened? In short, everything. You had injuries pile up. You lost all defensive structure. Scoring dried up. Guys hit slumps all at the same time. Your lack of depth was exposed. Your lack of high-end talent was exposed. At 41 games, this really looked like a team that was making the playoffs look likely, potentially. You were in third in the division, really no signs of slowing down. And then this stretch of 15 games happens. Honestly, I think even if it lasts the first 6, they lost 6 in a row. They hadn't lost back-to-back games more than once all season. They lose 6 in a row, 5 of those in regulation. And I really believe if they would have even just stopped it at they lost 6 in a row and then turned things around a little bit going into the Olympic break, that, if it stops at that initial losing streak, I think we're having a different conversation. I really do. I think that at worst, the Flyers are maybe 2 or 3 points out of a playoff spot if they halt this thing at the 6-game losing streak that started it. And then the break comes. It's the perfect time for you get to rest up, you get to relax, you get to reset, you get healthy, everything that goes into it. And then you come back and you make a push in the final 26 games, and you just need to make up 2 or 3 points. It's not impossible. Having this reach 15 games with just 3 wins in that time, that takes it right out of play. It would take a miracle for the Flyers to make the playoffs now. That's the struggle with this, that you got that far with it. I think that people don't care about the record. They don't care about the standings position if this is consistent. If the Flyers had a couple of 3-game losing streaks, they lost 3 in a row in October. Then they lost 3 in a row at the end of November. Then they lost 3 or 4 in a row in December, and so on. And it builds up over time. It doesn't just come as one big, here's 15 games, which is not a small sample size anymore. You're taking close to a quarter of the season and saying, can barely win a game. After half of the season looked really good. After you do a lot of things in that. Good win against Edmonton. the game against Anaheim that's so emotionally charged. Fans are into it. You have sellout crowd at Xfinity Mobile Arena. Everybody's getting hyped up about where this could be going. And it just comes to a crashing halt. And now you're back asking the same questions. You're back asking about, what do you do going forward? What are you supposed to, and that question comes in three different parts. What are you supposed to do right now? You signed Christian Dvorak to a contract extension. If you would have known, if somebody would have told you, hey, you're going to lose 12 of the next 15 games after you sign that extension in, pretty much. Do you do it, or do you prepare yourself for being a seller? What happens at the deadline? Do they even have that much to sell? They kind of don't. They just don't have a lot of the pieces that you would want to send off to other teams. Nick Delorier's on the last year of his contract. Carl Grundstrom's on a 1-year deal. Noah Juleson was on a 1-year deal. It's all well and good, but you're not going to get a lot for those guys. And so, Dvorak may have been one of those pieces. I think that everybody else that you can possibly think of, who's a veteran, who's somebody that you would maybe bank on potentially getting something of value for, that's not going to happen either until maybe the offseason. When there's more time for teams to plan for what the package is going to be. You might lay some of the groundwork now, but you're going to have to think about that. And there are things that happened that you can't get back. Tyson Forster's been hurt since December and is out for the season. Oh, well, teams deal with injuries. That's your version. That's your season-ending one that has really kind of disrupted your forward group, because he's a good goal scorer. He's really good in all areas of the game, and you don't have a player that can replicate that. And then you get to one of the other injuries. Dan Vladar gets hurt. Well, when you were without him for 6 games, it showed, because you barely made it out. You got a couple of wins. Doesn't mean that it's saving your season. And we'll get into the goaltending a little later on in the show as part of kind of this overall scope of everything. But it's a struggle. It's been a real struggle. And these games, for the most part, they've lost a few recently that were a lot closer. You think about some of the overtime games they've had or things like that. The start of this thing, it was the ugly. You're losing to Tampa 7-2 and 5-1 in back-to-back home games. You're losing to Pittsburgh 6-3. You're losing to the Rangers, who had admitted that they weren't going to be anything this year and were going to start selling. You lose to them 6-3. And it's like, what are you doing? What happened that it just fell off a cliff? And that's part of what goes into it, right? Like, this to me was one of the things that people were waiting for. The other shoe to drop. You had a good start being in a playoff spot. It's fun in the moment, but there was this feeling from some of the fans that, okay, you got off to a good start, but it's not the greatest team, and we've been down this road before, and when's the losing streak happening? When's the strong start disappear? And it didn't just happen as a slow, drawn-out process. It happened, the shoe didn't drop. It landed with a thud. And that's what's really hard about this situation, is that when you go through half a year, you want to start to become a believer in things. You want to see the positives for what they are. And losing 12 out of 15 will take a lot of the positives and make them go away really fast. So when that happens, you're left asking a lot of questions. Now you got to ask yourself, where are you going to get the high-end talent? You don't have a stud defenseman that's your number one. You don't have a top-line center. Where are you supposed to get those things? There's not really a lot of places out there for them. You're going to have to get creative. You're going to have to be aggressive. You're going to have to make some tough decisions about guys you currently have on the roster that you might think have a place, but you have to make sure that you get what you need to be a contending team if you really want to talk the talk. And when you lack the high-end talent that the Flyers do, you also have to be very protective of the guys you have, because you really can't move forward without this having some high-end talent to go with it, without having the skill that a lot of teams possess. And that's what's going to take me into one of the next pieces of everything. It's this ongoing saga that is Matvei Michkov, Rick Tocchet. What's not even to say what's the story here. There's so much to break down with it. It's the number one topic, and rightfully so. It always has been. It will be until something else can take its place. Why is this such a thing? Because the only future piece that is generating much of any buzz is Porter Martone, who's not even here yet. So the player that everybody's interested in seeing how he develops is Michkov, that wants to see the steps taken, that got excited about what he was able to do last season. And that's the thing. Like Martone, his immediate future seems pretty well known. You watch him play for Michigan State, and when his season's over, he's probably signing with the Flyers. That's what the plan seems to be. But there's not another prospect or player in their early 20s or younger with the hype and skill that Michkov has. So when the fans are hyper-focused on him, especially when the losses pile up, especially when he's playing 10 to 12 minutes a game, I do get it. This is important to you. Your frustration is boiling over. This has been an ongoing saga, not talking about the specific player, but just finding players that you feel like have that level of potential. It's been an ongoing process for over 10 years now. It's not just about missing the playoffs, possibly for the 6th year in a row. It's beyond that. It's the years of in between. Make the playoffs, miss the playoffs, make the playoffs, miss the playoffs. And knowing that you still didn't have those players. That when it came down to it, you were going back and forth between maybe contending, maybe make a small trade that gives you something to add to the depth. And then the next year, what can I sell? Then maybe acquire something small the following year that you very well had the year before, but you had to trade away because you're trying to salvage whatever you can. So as this saga plays out, I want to give my thoughts on it. I want to go to Danny Briere in this because he spoke at it earlier in the week or at this point a week ago, and I want to highlight that as well. But let's start with the simply put version of this to me. Michkov came into camp out of shape. That's where this starts. And I'm sure that that's a big red flag to a new coaching staff who's starting to feel out the team that they have in front of them, that's dealing with a first impression from everybody. I'm sure that was a big red flag. And it's a poor decision by the player in his first NHL offseason with no prior experience or knowledge of what this is like. Because of that, Michkov starts behind the 8 ball in every fashion, not just physically, learning the systems, being able to execute the systems, being in the coach's good graces, all of the above. Maybe even with his teammates. And because of the condensed schedule with the Olympics, and you need recovery time between games, you don't really get yourself back into shape unless you get some extended time off. Maybe this is, this break will do that for Michkov. Maybe that's not enough time. Which is why my first belief with everything with this is everybody just needs a clean slate here for everybody involved. The discourse about his minutes and usage, the discourse that Rick Tocchet just doesn't like him, the discourse about him being out of shape. If this is a lost year for the Flyers because they missed the playoffs again, it's also a lost year for him. He can correct it with the right approach in the offseason, and I believe he will, because it's a hard and valuable lesson for him to learn. But just throwing the blame solely on Tocchet or yelling that Tocchet hates him or whatever else is posted out there or whatever, it doesn't tell the story in full. It's kind of lazy, honestly. Multiple things can be true. He didn't show up in shape. He didn't do the things he needed to in the offseason to be ready for the season. Rick Tocchet and the Flyers coaching staff aren't handling it very well. Both things can be true. Now, the whole press conference that Danny Briere had before the break. The carnival is supposed to be this fun time, and it's understandable that tensions are a little high when you've lost as much as the Flyers had lost going into it. You just lost in overtime to the Kings after getting the doors blown off you for a couple of games on the road. Those 3 games were the nail in the coffin. They win in Colorado. Nobody's won in Colorado all season. You get a huge win and then play 3 games where you get nothing out of it and then lose in overtime. in the final game in January. And when the carnival happens, it's also a big media tour, mostly about what a great cause it is and getting to interact with fans and all of that. But in recent years, there's been a shift from, they used to put this on local TV. The NBC Sports Philadelphia network would be broadcasting something, allowing for you to be able to contribute from home, all of that type of stuff. And it would be handled by the local broadcasters. Now it's kind of more of a podcast tour. So you see Snow the goalie and PHLY Flyers, and they're landing some pretty significant guests going all the way up the ladder, right? So you see Dan Hilferty making the rounds, Keith Jones, Rick Tocchet. And Tocchet was obviously asked about Michkov because it happens that the carnival comes on the heels of the game where Michkov played his lowest amount of ice time. So it's the leading topic because, again, you're not winning. So you better be doing what needs to be done to develop the only thing that most fans care about. And 10 minutes, 21 seconds of ice time isn't cutting it. And Tocchet stands his ground on the ice time, on developing a player, and for the second straight day had mentioned something about not being on time for treatments or making sure you're on time for treatments. And this whole thing just blows up to the point where now national media is starting to circulate this. So Briere has the press conference. And I want to start by playing specifically the part where before Briere takes any questions, he spoke for about 10 minutes total. And the first 5 of it was nothing but Briere giving basically a prolonged statement, which already tells you a lot. That Briere is making a statement without taking questions, and it's half of the availability. All held less than 15 minutes before they're supposed to play a game, by the way. So I'm going to pull it up, take a listen to Danny Briere, and then we'll come back and go through everything else about this topic and continue on with the rest of the show.
All right, guys. I just wanted to address a little bit of the noise that is going around, especially when it comes to a little bit of a rocky patch that we've hit lately. I know it's upset a lot of people, but it's just the reality of a team growing. Early in the season, when we were fighting for one of the top position in the division, we realized that that was probably a little ahead of schedule. I was probably getting better results that was warranted at the time. What's happened now, the way we've been playing lately, and what's happening, I also know that it's not as bad as the way we've been playing. So we're somewhere in between all that. It's important to keep even keel. One thing I've learned, as a player, is not to get too high when things are going well, not to get too low when things are sliding. So that's how we feel. We've said all along that our players would tell us when it's time, but we're it's still part of the rebuild. We're still dealing with a young team that is learning how to face those tough games, those tough experiences. That's all part of the process. So that's number one. The other thing is the Rick Tocchet, Matvei, Michkov that's out there. One thing I can tell you, first of all, is Matvei Michkov is not going anywhere. Let's make that clear. Okay, Matvei is going to be here for a long time. He's going to be a good player here for the Flyers, and what he's going through right now is all part of the learning process. So that's out of the way. It's not going anywhere. I'll be here. I'll be a good player. You don't know what you don't know. Matvei arrived here, and him, along with guys like Denver Barkey and Nikita Gurbankin, they're learning how to become better pros. Now, you don't know before you arrive to the NHL what it's like on a daily basis and the grind and everything that's attached to it. And they're learning. And that's what Rick Tocchet is trying to teach them. I've been through it. Keith Jones has been through it. Rick Tocchet has been through it. It's all part of the process. You could go in our locker room, you can ask guys like Jamie Drysdale, Bobby Brink, Tyson Forster, Cam York. They've all been through it. When you arrive, it's tough. And that's where we were fortunate. I said it a couple of years ago when Matvei arrived earlier than expected. We knew there would be some, bumps along the way, and that's kind of what is happening. The other thing I can tell you, and I talk to Rick Tocchet on a daily basis, he wants Matvei to succeed. He wants to develop him to be the best player he can be. And along the way, there's tough lessons that comes with that. That's like raising a child. There's tough lessons that he's learning. It doesn't matter if he's playing, 12, 14, 16, or even if he was playing 52 minutes a night. He's learning along the way. That's part of the process. And it's going to make him a better player along the way. And Rick Tocchet wants that. He wants to be here for the long haul to lead this team. Him and Matvei, as they have a good relationship, sometimes they're fiery. Sometimes, when you're not winning, things are done and said, but they always come back to the table and they want the best for this team, and Rick wants the best for Matvei. I know there were some comments, regarding, missing treatments and from Rick Tocchet at the Carnival. Those comments were made, in relations to trying to explain how players are learning along the way. He wasn't targeting Matvei. Matvei is learning, and there's things that, have happened along the way, just like they've happened with, the Denver Barkeys, Provenkin, and, if you ask Trevor Zegras, I'm sure there's things like that. He's trying to teach these guys to become better pros, making sure that everything off the ice is taken care of. Treatments is one of them. Trainings, workouts are part of it. Your nutrition, getting massage to make sure you're prepared for the next game, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of stuff that comes into play when you're learning to become a better pro. So that's what's happening. Don't forget that, guys like Travis Konechny has gone through it. Just a few years ago, he went from, I think, the first few seasons where he scored 24 goals, I think 3 years in a row, and then all of a sudden, he went 2 seasons where he couldn't get to 20 goals. That's how we got Trevor Zegras. That's how we got Owen Tippett. I've been through it myself. There's ups and downs along the way, and that's what, Matvei and almost everybody else, have gone through. Unless you're Wayne Gretzky, it probably didn't hit too much bumps along the way. Most players are going through it. That's all it is. And I wanted to make sure that was clear.
So there's Danny Briere, the Flyers general manager. And to me, Briere did what he had to do here. He had to calm the waters. He had to make sure he was upfront and honest and addressing the main concern that the fans have. Matvei Michkov is not going anywhere. And I'm standing right to his left. You may have caught me in the video there, but I'm standing right to his left. And I can tell you from listening to him, my first thought was, and this is just by judging again, I'm standing right there. I'm listening to him speak. And I'm kind of sort of trying to watch his body language a little bit, or at least read the vibe I'm getting from it. And my first thought was, he can't believe he even has to do this. He doesn't really want to, but he has to. And he knows why he has to. Danny Briere knows that Matvei Michkov is important to the future. And it's really not even about the potential skill or high-end talent. It's about the show. This player arrived in North America 2 seasons ahead of schedule as a 19-year-old. Briere and Keith Jones, it's the president of hockey operations and the general manager of the team. They went to the airport to pick him up, turned it into a photo opportunity with everyone, all smiles. Briere's carrying his sticks around the airport. They had a big press conference the next day, introducing Michkov to Philadelphia. And even if you didn't want people to crown him as a savior, you made it clear that this guy was important. And Briere has to know, and I believe he does, that if anything happens that pushes Michkov out the door, it's the end for all of them. Because the fan base will show it. It will be the ultimate gaslighting to do all of those things and roll out the red carpet for Michkov and then choose the head coach in his first season over the player in his second season who could be here for the next decade and beyond. Or to give any impression that this is being done perfectly, that that there's not a problem in some capacity, that everything is okay. You can't get you have to give the impression that everything is fixable. That okay, so it hasn't been a smooth year. It hasn't been a great year. Michkov did not contribute to that. To avoiding that. He came into camp out of shape. Also may have dealt with this bit of an ankle injury, things like that. Whatever the case may be, enough things happened that he was not able to be at the top of his game at the start of the season. And you're left trying to catch up for the rest of it, because even if, as Briere kind of says there, even if you do get into better shape, and Michkov looks like he's in better shape. He looks like he's more of the player that he was last season now than he did at the beginning. But it doesn't mean that it's a great version, because he's still coming up behind other guys that he's better than, just from watching last year. So you have to start, you start there, that he doesn't do himself any favors, but you have to acknowledge that this hasn't been the smoothest ride with the coaching staff. And whether that has to do with you start with a bad first impression and it's held over your head for the rest of the year, or just based on performance. The performances sometimes weren't that good. And listen, a coach's job is pretty simple. Try to win games. As much as everybody wants it to be all about development, the way you win games is guys develop faster by being successful and helping you win games. And when you see that they're able to help you win games, they play more. That's how most coaches do it. It's exactly, how many times, Mike Sullivan, is going to have a Hall of Fame career based off of being able to do that. John Cooper's been able to do that. Jared Bednar's been able to do that. And that's how you kind of get longevity in the league as a head coach. Otherwise, you're on to the next destination, because if you didn't win and nobody's developing, what are we doing? So I think Briere knows everything that's important about it. And it doesn't mean, Michkov's a key player. Obviously, he's been a key player for this team. And he'll continue to be the center of attention, not only now, but it's going to be that way in the future too. But you have to be able to understand both sides of the equation when you go into this. He didn't do his part in the offseason, and he's kind of having to make up for it. And then it doesn't mean that it's being handled properly. And listen, here's the other part of the equation for Michkov. You can start the conversation with, well, he didn't come into camp in shape. Do you know where the conversation eventually turns? Bad habits. Not doing the things that you need to do to become a better offensive player because you didn't pitch in at the other end of the ice and be a more all-around player. I've said this before about Michkov. Is it the worst thing in the world if what you're really trying to turn him into isn't a checking line guy, but just trying to turn him into a little bit more of what Tyson Forrester is? A guy who plays all three areas of the ice and seems to understand exactly what he needs to do at every second of the game. That's how you can maximize a player's potential. And like I said, to me, what everybody needs from this situation is a clean slate. Danny Briere more or less got up there to say, Michkov's not going anywhere. Rick Tocchet's not going anywhere. Figure it out. Enough of this noise. Enough of everything that's being said on the outside. Today's a new day. And we start over understanding that the long-term goal of making this player a key part of the team for the long haul is more important than what's going on right now. You've lost 12 out of 15 games anyway. Who cares about where you think you're going this year when it feels like it's slipping away, when you can get it back on the rails and understand that in the shorter term, you don't want to be developing this kid for 5 more years and still saying the same things 3-4 years down the line as you get close to this, and wondering, when's it all going to click? When's he going to start leading you to, into the playoffs, to maybe win playoff series? When does that happen? It's not supposed to happen right now, necessarily. It would be nice if it did, but it's not supposed to be. And there is a point, though, where it's supposed to turn, and you want to make sure that he's at his best and getting what he needs collectively. Off ice, on ice, instruction toward the game, instruction on how to be a pro, all of the above. You got to make it happen. And to me, that's what Danny Briere did said by getting up for that press conference. Everybody's here. Nothing's going to change in the immediate. It's a new coach. He's in his second year as a player. Figure it out. And let's move on from having that be a daily discussion. But it's going to be until it starts to turn around, or until somebody's no longer here. And even then, it probably wouldn't be, because if Rick Tocchet's the one who's no longer here down the line and Michkov starts taking off again, it's easy to look back on whatever length of time you're talking about, but it'll quiet everything down because at least the player is still here. If it's the other way around and it's Michkov's not here and Tocchet is, and Michkov's thriving, you start to sit there and go, why did it have to happen this way? You knew how important he was. Why did it have to happen this way? And who's to say it's not going to happen again? Because you keep screwing around with guys who are taken high as draft picks, have a lot of skill set, have everybody in the industry saying how great of a player they're going to be, and then it doesn't turn out to be what you think it's going to be. So I want to move forward with a couple quick hitter topics. Goaltending and special teams have both been kind of key contributors to the stretch of losing. The goaltending has been average at best. Vladar's been great, close to elite numbers, honestly. Certainly above average for a goaltender. And Sam Ersson has had his moments, but you can see more than ever that the consistency is not there. And even if he's working hard at it all the time, and even if he's as even-keeled as it gets, it's not helping the team move forward. So that there's already the possibility that they explore something else down the road, if not, in the present before the trade deadline, after the season's over. Special teams is a whole nother story, because there's a lot of guys on the roster who are going to be part of that going forward for a while, both power play and penalty kill. The penalty kill is okay. I'm not going to make it sound like it's the worst in the league or anything like that. It's not the top by any stretch, but the power play is once again ranking in the bottom 5 of the league. And you kind of keep wondering, how does this keep happening? Why is it still a problem? You change players, you change personnel, you change coaches, you change this, you change that. You keep trying to figure something out, and for some reason, nobody's able to do what all the other teams out there look like they're able to do. Maybe it's not the biggest thing now, because when you've lost 12 of 15, everything's a problem. But when they had lost 6 in a row, for example, and a chunk of that has to do with Vladar's out, Ersson's in as the regular number 1 at that given moment, there was, even when that situation was happening and goaltending was not great, the power play was such a detriment. And the penalty kill fell off a cliff too, but the power play was really just such a detriment, because not only do they not score, but it's a momentum killer. Like, you're supposed to come out and use that opportunity as a way to get chances. They would, just do the opposite. They'll give up a shorthanded rush, force their goalie to make a great save, give up a shorthanded goal, something. It just really it has become the problem area. And to me, it was going to be the biggest reason that they didn't make the playoffs until this stretch reached, the maximum here. And you start to see, okay, goaltending was a little shaky at different points. Even Vladar, to a degree, when he came back, had to get adjusted. Not saying he hasn't played well. He's played very well throughout the course of a lot of his recent games. But that being said, it doesn't necessarily change, that just because the goaltending was a little better or whatever it is, it doesn't change that one or the other. Goaltending or special teams has kind of been the biggest issue for the Flyers all year, and it's continued. So I want to shift gears very quickly, and we're going to get ready to wrap up the show, but I do want to hit on the Olympics, and it's going to be kind of a filler for our 3 stars of the week because there's been multiple weeks to kind of cover, and those weeks haven't been great for the Flyers. They've lost 12 out of 15 games, so it's going to be harder to find a player who you sit there and say, that's a guy who's worthy of 3 stars of the week. So we're doing a twist on the 3 stars of the week this week, because the 3 stars of the week this week are 3 players that you will get to watch over the course of the next 2 weeks while the Olympics is in action. And I'll bring them up right now. Travis Sanheim, Dan Vladar, and Rasmus Ristolainen. Sanheim playing for Team Canada. Also, head coach Rick Tocchet is an assistant coach for Team Canada on John Cooper's staff, so threw him in there as well. Dan Vladar for Team Czechia, and Rasmus Ristolainen for Team Finland. And this all gets pretty well underway. The whole thing gets underway actually this morning, but it will be, and Finland's the only team that plays this morning, by the way, out of the group. Canada and Czechia actually face off in the first game for both teams on Thursday. So there's something to look forward to because there will be some Flyer representation in that. And in addition, there will obviously be a key focus on Team USA. The women's part of this tournament is already, pretty much full-fledged into the medals at this point. You're almost up to the quarterfinals already. There's only a handful of games left before you're out of that and you're on to the quarterfinals, the semifinals, and eventually the gold medal game. And that team just looks unstoppable, Team USA on the women's side. The men's side is going to be really interesting because obviously there are European teams that are able to be well represented with NHL talent. You think of Sweden and Finland and teams like that. But I think a lot of people are wondering if we're gearing up for a rematch of the Four Nations Face-Off Championship, the Team USA, Team Canada matchup. So we shall see. I mean, I do enjoy watching the Olympics to see kind of how it's going to go so far. The women's side, like I said, that team has been just a juggernaut so far. And we'll see where that goes as they get into those games where now it's down to even the slightest mistake and, the slightest hint of an upset and you're out. And you might not get anything. You might get bronze. You might get silver. You're going to play some tough games going forward because it's going to be for, where the stakes amp up a lot more. So with that, that's the Olympics. And again, the Olympics themselves are going to run through I believe it's the 22nd when the Olympics are over. That's the gold medal game. Then the teams are going to return. And NHL teams actually are going to be able to start practicing in another week's time, actually. And they get some time to get back and just have those practices before the games will start up eventually. But there still will be some time. So, it remains to be seen. There's a chance that somewhere in the middle of that, let's just say Finland gets knocked out or Czechia gets knocked out, then Dan Vladar can go back to practice with the Flyers and be there by the 20th if they don't make the medal round, or something like that. So just something to keep in mind as you watch the schedule going forward. So I do want to bring up the look ahead as well. For now, on this, I'm highlighting the next 3, which is whatever's left for the month of February. They're going to play 2 games on the road back-to-back. The Flyers play the Washington Capitals on February 25th at 7 p.m., then play the New York Rangers on Thursday, February 26th at 8 p.m. Those 2 games on the road, they come home for the first time after the Olympic break on Saturday, February 28th, 3 o'clock start, Flyers, Bruins, and that's what's going to kind of take us back into the swing of things. But before I have another show, the Flyers will play one more game in there as well. They're going to have another road game against Toronto on the following Monday night. So there will be some time to kind of get back into the swing of things from a game perspective before we get to the next show. Speaking of that next show, you can find that February 25th. We'll do a bit of a short, there's not going to be a lot to talk about, obviously, with nothing happening game-wise between now and then. So kind of a short pre-game version going into that first game back, 6:30. We'll take it to about 7. Game will come on and we'll go from there. So that's the next episode when you can expect that. I want to thank everybody for listening once again and joining me on this episode. A lot of stuff to talk about, obviously. don't forget to stay tuned at Kevin underscore Durso on the Twitter X platform, on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. You can find me on all social media, and be on the lookout for everything. The reels of pre and post game, keeping you informed game by game. There are clips from this podcast that I've started posting recently. So every time I do an episode, I'll try to pull a handful of clips that I can use and repurpose throughout the course of the week to get us caught up. So you're going to have that as well. And you can find those anywhere that you can get clips like that. So again, typical social media, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, etc. So, and don't forget to continue following the BFA Sports platform for more shows like this. As we're in the middle of an interesting part of the season, a lot of things happening. I'm looking forward to the last 26, no matter where it goes, just helping provide coverage that you can enjoy. So I'm thankful that you are listening to this and, following along with me during the course of the season. It means a lot to me, and I really appreciate it. So with that, that's going to do it for this episode of the Flyers Files podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Durso. Once again, a week after the Olympic break.